Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Shahidi, co-CIO of Evoke Advisors, and I'm excited to be joined today by Mr. Spencer Raskoff. Spencer, thank you for taking the time to share your insights with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Very good. Spencer is a serial tech entrepreneur. He co-founded several popular billion-dollar companies, including Zillow, which he served as a CEO for about a decade, Hotwire, which is a travel site that was sold to Expedia for about $700 million a couple of decades ago. And most recently, Picasso, which is focused on second home co-ownership, which is also the fastest company to go from launch to unicorn, achieving $1 billion valuation in just 5 months. Pretty remarkable. Spencer, you've also created a SPAC. You're a visiting professor at your alma mater, Harvard. You co-founded .la that shines a light on the tech scene in Los Angeles. You've published a couple books. You host a couple of podcasts, including one with your 13-year-old son called Dad, I Have a Question. Very, very cool. So today, what we'd like to do is dive into your background to better understand what sparked the interest in technology. We'll discuss your passion for mentorship, and we'll talk about your perspectives on how technological innovation will continue to impact real estate as well as other industries. How does that sound?
That sounds great. That's a lot to cover.
Of course. Okay, so why don't we start at the beginning? When and why did you first become interested in technology, and how did you develop your knowledge?
I have to go back to my parents and my dad's career story, which is actually far more interesting than my career story. My dad went to Wharton undergrad and had a very conventional, business background. Graduated in 1967. He was a partner at an accounting firm, at a Big 8 accounting firm. I think the youngest partner they'd ever had in the early 70s. And in the restroom at his office, he met, he was like washing his hands, and I think it was 1971. He's washing his hands, and there's a British guy next to him washing his hands, and he's all angry. I'm so mad at this firm is terrible, blah, blah, blah. My dad says, what's the problem? I'm a partner here. How can I help? And he says, I'm the business manager. I'm the manager of the Rolling Stones. I'm Prince Rupert Lowenstein, and your fancy New York accounting firm won't take on the Rolling Stones as a client. And my dad's like, yeah, that's because they're drug addicts and they throw TVs out of windows and whatnot. Like, I'm not surprised to hear that, but what's the problem? Why are you here? And he says, well, I wanted Herman and Cranston, which is now part of KPMG, to audit the 1972 Stones European tour. And my dad said, well, that sounds kind of interesting. I'll do that. And so he took a leave of absence from the partnership at his firm and moved to Europe and was basically the controller and audit partner on a rock tour in 1972. And he started a career in music and business management from that point. I was born in 75. So I grew up with him as the business manager and tour producer for the Rolling Stones, U2, David Bowie, Paul Simon, Pink Floyd, 38 Special, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Elvis Presley, and then the estate of Elvis Presley after Elvis died, et cetera. And so to answer your question, Alex, like I saw he was on this sort of straight and narrow path of, let's call it like Wall Street-y type, but accounting. And then his career took a total left turn to do something entrepreneurial. And that was very impactful to me growing up watching that and watching the cool, interesting career and successful career that he had by following an entrepreneurial passion. So I went to Harvard undergrad and started in investment banking at Goldman Sachs, because that's what you do when you don't know what to do. If you go to a good college and you graduate with that, like not actually with any particular skill or training, you follow on-campus recruiting to investment banking. And I was pretty unhappy. I did my 2 years in New York in banking, and it wasn't for me. And I moved to San Francisco, did a year in private equity. It also wasn't for me. And it was at that point that I got the entrepreneurial bug and left TPG, the private equity firm I was at, just to do my first startup. So it was a bit of a winding path as well, but I'm very glad that that I left investment banking for entrepreneurship and went through a lot of startups, and we can talk about whichever of them you want in whatever order you want. But that's how I got onto that entrepreneurial path.
Okay, and then what about what drew you to technology? But what is it specific about that industry that attracted you?
I think it's the pace, the pace of change and innovation in technology that's really differentiated from most other industries. Like I don't know, as an example, I think of, when we started Zillow in 2005, we built a really great business. And then I feel like it was around 2009, 2010, I remember sitting at my desk watching Steve Jobs demo at the Worldwide Developer Conference at WWDC, demo the iPhone and allude to a coming app store. And it's kind of weird to think about this, but remember the first version of the iPhone that had no speaker, had no, it really was just an iPod with a phone. It had, I don't even think it had a web browser, but if it had apps on it, it was just the Apple apps. And it wasn't for a year that they added an app store. And so then like 3 months later, when it became clear that they were doing an app store, we pivoted the whole company towards mobile. And dropped.com from the name. It was no longer Zillow.com, it was just Zillow. We changed the whole dev team to focus on apps and mobile web. I mean, so to answer your question about like why technology, like those types of pivots that are required in technology are what keeps it interesting, what keeps it fresh, what keeps it challenging. And most other industries don't have that type of wholesale change and reinvention required every couple of years in order to stay in business.
Okay. And what is there something specific about real estate that made you focus on that space initially?
I mean, yes, yeah, nothing personal. Like, I mean, my mom was actually a real estate agent when I was a kid and then a teacher. So, I mean, I grew up interested in real estate. Like we would go to open houses for fun. And like, that was like a family activity we would do on the weekends because my parents were just like, like many people today, real estate obsessed, but that was kind of early for people to be that real estate obsessed. But the reason we started Zillow wasn't because of any personal connection I had to real estate. It was because when we left Expedia in 2005, there were 4 of us that left together. We sat in a conference room for 6 months trying to think of a business idea. And 3 of us were shopping for homes at that time. And we were shocked that in 2005, 10 years after the internet started, the home shopping on the web was still really terrible. And we would have one browser open with the county website, King County in Seattle, where we were based, had a pretty good website actually with really good data, but most counties didn't have that type of information. And then we'd open an MLS service where a real estate agent friend would give us a password. And we're like, well, the combination of these 2 things is really cool. Like, how come the consumer doesn't have access to this? How do we democratize access to this information? How do we turn on the lights in the dark room and shine a light on real estate information by combining public data with secret industry databases? And so the pattern recognition, there's kind of pattern recognition plus this spirit of democratization. The pattern recognition came from the online travel experience, where 10 years earlier or 5 years earlier when I was starting Hotwire, and 5 or 10 years earlier when my co-founders at Zillow were starting Expedia, we did the same thing. We took an industry database, which was the GDS, which was only accessible to travel agents. I confuse real estate agents, travel agents. It was only accessible to travel agents, and we flipped it around. So remember, before Expedia, before Hotwire, before online travel, like you'd be on the phone with a travel agent and you'd hear him or her like clickety clack typing on a keyboard. And all you want to do is jump through the phone and be like, show me what you're looking at. I know you're using a computer. I can hear you're using a computer. That must be connected to something. Like, why can't I have that? Step aside, intermediary, let me have direct access to it. And that's really what the online travel pioneers did, was they gave direct access to consumers to that industry database. And that's what we did again with Zillow, when we took an industry database and county records and made it accessible to consumers.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds obvious now, but go back 15 to 20 years. You have to have the foresight to see that this is the way it should be, because there's an inefficiency there.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what led you down these paths, where you identify an inefficiency. It should be available to everybody. It's for like the common person, and you try to capture those. Yeah,
I mean, a good way to think about startup ideation or brainstorming for an idea is try to like market map almost in a like a XY axis, total addressable market size relative to net promoter score. Or in other words, like what's a really big market that people really hate? So healthcare is an obvious one, like gazillions of dollars spent, but everybody generally hates their healthcare experience, right? And real estate is another one, like 1.6 trillion of residential real estate transactions, 80 billion of commissions, 20 billion of advertising, and everybody hates buying and selling their house because it's a pain in the neck. Where you find huge market and really low customer satisfaction is where there are usually good startup ideas.
Right. And if there's a good technology solution to bridge that gap.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. So maybe give us a snippet of your first startup.
Sure.
You've had a lot of them, but it's I think it's always helpful to go to the first one.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. So 1999, I was at TPG, private equity firm, which was a big private equity firm at the time, but it's become a really, really big private equity firm. And TPG got its start in the airline industry. They bought Continental Airlines out of bankruptcy and turned it around. They bought America West Airlines out of bankruptcy and turned it around. And by the time I got there, they had sold some of their Continental stake to Northwest. So they actually controlled 3 US airlines, and they controlled Ryanair, which is the largest carrier in Europe. It's sort of the Southwest Airlines of Europe. So LBO shop controls 4 airlines. 1999, the height of the first internet boom. And what happened at the time, as you may remember, is the private equity firms had VC jealousy. Like all of a sudden, in the 80s and 90s, the kings of the universe were, Rubenstein and Henry Kravis and David Bonderman and Steve Schwartzman and these private equity titans, Saul Steinberg, Mike Milken, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, the mid 90s came along, and it was Kleiner Perkins and Excel and Sequoia and Benchmark and these upstarts from Sand Hill Road in San Francisco or in the Silicon Valley that were getting all the attention, all the media, all the covers of Fortune and Forbes, and most importantly, all the assets from asset allocators, like you and the other people on this call that were voting as LPs, to move money into venture. And so the private equity firms were really scrambling to try to figure out how to respond. And they did 3 things. 2 were really dumb, and 1 was really smart. The first really dumb thing they did was a lot of them, including TPG, raised side funds, usually just of LP money. So at TPG, I think we raised a $200 million fund just from the partners, no outside LPs, to kind of be the last money, the dumb money, it turns out in retrospect, in the Series D, E, or F of a lot of other venture deals. And so we put out a lot of late stage growth investments that tanked when the market crashed in 2000. The second dumb thing that they did, like a couple other private equity firms, was they created an incubator. I think the TPG one was in partnership with like Bain or BCG or McKinsey or whoever. And there were a bunch of these incubators that were in vogue in the late 90s, and that also fizzled and became nothing. But the third thing they did that worked was they looked at their portfolio and they tried to figure out how do they leverage their existing portfolio into the internet. And so to make a long story short, we went to those 3 airlines and then also American, United, and 1 or 2 other airlines, and created an industry consortium company that would be a discount travel website. So TPG went to 6 airlines and said, hey, let's start a discount travel website. It'll compete with Priceline, which was aligned with Delta Airlines. The airlines loved the idea. We got equity exclusivity from the airlines, so they could only own stock in us in 1 discount travel company, not a competitor. We came up with a really clever way to allocate the equity, where for each of the first 4 or 5 years of the company's existence, we gave out a certain amount of stock based on how many tickets each airline sold through Hotwire. So we created an incentive for them to sell more and lower their prices through Hotwire in order to gain more equity share. And then TPG and the airlines put in the founding 75 million of capital. So it wasn't like 2 kids in a garage kind of startup. This was a startup hatched within a very big private equity firm. But the 27-year-old junior partner and the 23-year-old junior associate, and that's me, who put the whole deal together at TPG with David Bonderman, who became the chairman of Hotwire, Carl and I left to run the company. And so we left with these founding contracts, him and me, and not much else. And we went and started recruiting people and building the company. We didn't have a name. It was called It was called CIMO, CIMO, which is Opaque Model Internet Company, which is what we called it in the founding documents. It's OMIC backwards, so it was called this Project CIMO. And then because we couldn't hire anybody to join Project CIMO because that was just terrible, we renamed it Project Purple Demon, which sounded really cool. Remember, we're in San Francisco in 1999, and we're trying to recruit engineers in the middle of the first internet bubble. And so Purple Demon was a cool place to work until we renamed it Hotwire. That was 99. Company was going well, things are great. 2 years in, everything is crushing it, and the company's doing terrific. And then 9/11 happens. And when 9/11 happened, obviously it was a disaster for the world and for the country, and it was also a disaster for us as an online travel company. I mean, we had tens of thousands of customers stranded around the country, around the world, actually. We had sold tickets to the hijackers, not the September 11th flights, but the September 10th flight from Bangor, Maine to Boston Logan, I think it was, that put the Logan cell in place. I didn't ever disclose that until just a year or two ago. I felt enough time had finally passed, but that was something that only the most senior executives knew, because the FBI came and told us, and wanted us to turn over whatever information we had about it. So that created this really terrible sense of guilt among the executive team, because we had this connection to it. And then I gave a speech at the Millennium Hilton on September 9th. And the Millennium Hilton was crushed by the Twin Towers. And then I flew home on September 10th, the flight from Newark to San Francisco, which ended up, I think that was the one that ended up in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So I was saved by a day being on a flight on September 10th, the same flight number. So it was a mess. It was a very difficult time for the company. We had to lay off a quarter of the company to avoid bankruptcy, and we did a down round, which wiped out a lot of the equity, and it was really, really tough time at the company. And the good news, the story does have a happy ending, because by 2 years later, 2003, we were on the right track again, after a lot of hard work, and we're getting ready to think about going public. And then Expedia came and made an offer that was super attractive, and we decided to take that. And so we sold the company to Expedia, and I moved up to Seattle and started working at Expedia.
Yeah, it's not a typical first startup story. Right?
No,
Yeah,
I learned a lot in a short period of time.
Yeah, the smart move is, instead of starting it with a bunch of your buddies in the garage, you actually surround yourself with really smart people who knew what they were doing. And that led to good results ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so fortunate. I mean, I learned so much from that experience, including from David Bonderman, who's one of my mentors. And then Jeff Jordan was on our board. He was the head of PayPal at the time, and now he's leading venture capitalist, Andreessen Horowitz. And John Scully was on our board from Apple and Pepsi, and Don Kendall Jr. And I mean, we had an incredible board, and I learned a lot. The other thing I learned is that down rounds will really get you, and I don't think I understood that as a 23-year-old founder, but down round that basically wipes out the common equity of the company, makes it so that when you sell the company for $685 million, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, really only the VCs, only the preferred equity, does well. And so that was also an important lesson. But by 27, I was on to my next, or actually not my next startup, but I was at Expedia, and was the president, or not the president, it was the head of the hotel business, I think, was my title. And Expedia was more than a 10-year-old company, maybe a 15-year-old company by that point. They had spun out of Microsoft and was partially owned by IAC, by Barry Diller's holding company. And it had really lost its way. They were our acquirer. So I got there, I didn't choose to work there. I just sort of showed up for work. And it was not an innovative place anymore. It had become tired and old and not innovative. It was a pretty unpleasant, short stint. After about a year there, I was unhappy and started brainstorming business ideas, and left with the founding team from Expedia that also was ready for a change. And so that's where we found ourselves, in a conference room, shopping for houses and thinking of startup ideas. I will share with you briefly the other finalist idea that we had at the time, after 6 months of 4 people staring at each other in a conference room. The two, and it's actually a good lesson about like where ideas usually come from, which it's usually from some problem in your life. And as I already said, one of the problems in our life was real estate shopping. The other was, after working for 15 years, we had all these hard drives, like literal physical hard drives, with family photos and data and files and whatever from different companies that we'd worked at. And when we were finally going through them all, because it was the first time that any of us had stopped working since our careers began, and we realized it was very difficult to move files from one machine to another. Now, there was no cloud. Remember, this is 2005. The term cloud hadn't been invented yet. There was no AWS, there was no Azure, there was no Dropbox or Box or anything. And so you're like you're using like flash drives to move that, and you were connecting with Ethernet cables, like one hard drive to another. And we're like, this is crazy. There's got to be a better way. And we basically had the business plan for Dropbox was what we came up with. We're like, this thing will connect to the internet and there'll be storage there and people will be able to move files from a machine up to the internet and then to another machine, whatever. And we decided not to pursue that in favor of the Zillow idea, because we felt that the internet giants would eventually make storage free, that they would want you in their ecosystem. And so it would be a race to the bottom on storage and compute power. Now, we were sort of right. I mean, we definitely didn't predict that it would be Amazon and creating AWS or Microsoft or Google. None of them, were in the space. Far from it. We thought it would be like Yahoo or eBay or Excite or Lycos or AOL or something. But anyway, that's why we decided not to do the storage idea, which basically became Dropbox. Dropbox got big enough, fast enough that they kind of, threaded the needle, and they're kind of at the enterprise level, but not at like the AWS enterprise level. So they made it, but only by the skin of their teeth is kind of how I would, they're lucky that AWS hasn't gone downstream to eat Dropbox or boxes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Anyway.
So, yeah, why don't we talk about this notion of being a serial entrepreneur? Obviously, starting a business and making it successful is really difficult to do. You've done it multiple times. So 2 questions. One is, how have you been able to repeat that process that we know is difficult to do? And the second is, what motivates you to keep starting over? Because you have a couple thousand employees, you have all these resources at your disposal, and then you walk away from that and go and start over where you have just a few employees, if any, and you're starting from scratch. So what motivates you to do that? And then 2, how have you been able to successfully repeat that process?
So most people have a strong preference between the 0 to 1 stage when you're just getting an idea going, or the scaling stage, kind of 50 to 500 employees, or like the big scale, like 500 to 50,000 employees and publicly traded and whatever. I actually, I was surprised how much I liked running Zillow through that second and third stage. Like I liked running Zillow as a public company. I thought it was fun and interesting and challenging. I liked working with public shareholders. I liked the kind of hand-to-hand combat of being publicly traded. And I liked having a bigger stack at the table. The nice thing about a startup is you're super small and nimble, but the nice thing about being a big company is if you have an idea, an initiative that, you want to pursue, you can, you got a lot of chips. You can, at Zillow, we'd be like, hey, let's devote 20 people to see what we can come up with on 3D imagery of houses. And let's throw 10 people at, figuring out if we should launch Canada, and let's throw 20 people at, that whatever. You can't do that as a small company. So I like all those different stages. The thing that has motivated, every time I've left a job, it has been because my wife has observed that I'm kind of unhappy at that job. Like, she's the one that told me to leave Goldman Sachs when I was 22. She told me to leave TPG to start Hotwire. She told me to leave, Expedia to start Zillow. She told me to leave Zillow to sort of retire and then start a bunch of new stuff. And so I definitely think it's important in one's career to have somebody in your life, whether it's a spouse, a friend, parent, loved one, whoever, that can hold up a mirror to you and tell you things about yourself that maybe you didn't even see.
Yeah, sometimes you're too close to it to see the obvious.
Totally. And there's a lot of inertia, especially if you're focused on that thing. It's like, well, I'm going to work today. I'm going to run through that wall. And you're like, got to get to the next quarter and then the next year and budget planning and the review cycle and the next comp cycle and the whatever. It's like you're just going through the motions. And so sometimes you need somebody to like throw cold water in your face and tell you like, hey, wait, like you're not happy, can't you see that? So that's, I think that's been a very important partnership, for 28 years, I think it's been. But then I guess the other part of your question was like, in doing it over again, like the most important thing is the people. Like I was in a board meeting yesterday, for example, on a company that was not a company I started, just a company I'm on the board of. And we spent like 2 or 3 hours on people topics, on like, this person needs to be managed out, or this person is being up leveled, or thinking about promoting this, all this discussion with the CEO about the org chart. And like, after that discussion, I said to the group, I'm like, it's amazing. Like the more tech centric a company is, the more the people matter. And that's kind of surprising. I think most people on the outside be like, oh, that's a tech company. Like surely the robots run everything, the machines run everything. But actually it's the exact opposite in my experience. Like the more techy a company is, the more important the people are. I don't know why that is, but that's been my experience. Maybe because it's, you're not manufacturing anything. Like all you're manufacturing is creativity. And so the people are what's really important. But if you're manufacturing, pencils or whatever, it's like the people maybe don't matter as much because it's just,
it's also easier to see when there's a problem, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I have been very fortunate, maybe not fortunate, I've been very intentional and fortunate about surrounding myself with people that I like, that I learn from, that challenge me, that make me better at what I do. When we started Picasso, I started it with someone that I worked really closely with at Zillow for years, and we went out and we hired, the first 20 or so people were like, it was like fantasy football, like draft picking of like, okay, I want this person who had this role at Zillow. I want this person who had this role at Hotwire. I want this person who had this role at, one of his startups. And we were able to create that founding team of the first 10 or 20 people, like dream team style, just like 15 years earlier at Zillow, we did the same thing when we were starting Zillow. We were like, okay, I want this person who worked with me at Expedia, this person worked with me at Hotwire, this person worked with me at Goldman Sachs, like, cherry picking all these great people. And that makes all the difference. I mean, that's everything.
And how do you get them? Is it just telling a story and it inspires them to join you? Is it paying a lot, or how does that work?
It's not paying a lot. It's really not, at least in my experience. I mean, there are some people and industries that are more financially motivated than others. In my experience and generally in tech, I'd say people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want, if you're going to sit at a computer all day and type code or whatever, or answer customer service inquiries, like you want to feel like you're part of a mission, part of changing the way people shop for a home, changing the way people own second homes, changing the way people plan and book vacations, like something big and bold and badass. So it's painting a big vision and mission that people can feel connected to. It's giving them a lot of autonomy and giving people career pathing and independence and responsibility, and giving them good managers. In my experience, people don't quit companies, they quit managers. And the research is pretty clear. If people have a couple close friends at work and they feel that they feel a personal connection to their manager, who really invests in them and their career and mentors them and coaches them and teaches them and makes them better, that even if the company's not doing well, even if the compensation isn't great, like they'll stay and they'll stay motivated. Now that's hard in a remote environment. It's very difficult for people to form new friendships at work over video conferencing. It's very, very difficult for them to form a relationship with their manager. So that puts the onus on the executive team to like doubly invest, triply invest in people and culture and ways to drive employee engagement, because it's very difficult. It really has to be manufactured a little bit more artificially. It's like, I don't know, it's like growing flowers in a what's it called, in a flower greenhouse versus like out in nature. It's like, you have to like really carefully control the everything, because it's like it just requires extra TLC.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, why don't we shift gears to your passion for mentorship? obviously you teach at Harvard, you publish books, you host podcasts, you also launch your own SPAC, Supernova. And I imagine this is largely because of your interest in mentorship. So maybe talk to us about what drives you in that regard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I am at the stage of my career, and I'm going to sound really old here because I sort of am, which is I'm I'm not the right. I shouldn't be playing anymore on the field. Like, playing professional sports, running a company, especially an early stage company, is a bit of a young person's game because it requires massive energy, focus, devotion, and I don't think I am the best person in the world for that anymore. I'm at the stage of my career where I'm coaching, just like a coach of a sport. I mean, that's what I'm doing. So I do that with different companies at different stages, and I get paid in different ways. So 75 and Sunny Ventures is my family office. I do about 40 or 50 early stage investments a year there, where I'm writing $50,000 to $250,000 checks into startups. I've got 100 active companies in my portfolio. My website, 75 and Sunny, has, lists most of the portfolio companies there. And there I'm getting paid, if you will, for my mentorship by my venture investing, by my angel investing. And so I talk with all those founders pretty frequently, some of them more frequently than some of them as often as once a week. And I'm coaching those companies. Then all the way at the other end of the spectrum, my 3 SPACs, I took these SPACs public, and then they're merging with private companies, and they're creating big publicly held companies. One has already de-SPACed, $3 billion company called OfferPad. Another is in the process, about $1.5 billion company called Rigetti. And the third one is still looking. So there, I'm getting paid by my sponsor Promote in the SPAC, and I'm coaching and mentoring those management teams as they transition from private to public. And then in the middle, I'm coaching these companies that I'm starting. So Picasso, I started with my co-founder. And we can talk more about that in a second. And then .LA, I started with a co-founder, and then Recon Food, I started with my daughter and co-founder. That's a food social network. And I have a couple others that I'm incubating and haven't announced yet. So there, I'm the co-founder and starting these companies, and I'm coaching and mentoring. So I'm like a coach that has like a soccer field over here, and a football field over here, and a tennis match over here, and a baseball game over here, and I'm kind of coaching all these different players and also coaches of themselves on the different teams, rather than playing on the field. And that's a really fun way to spend this stage of my career, including teaching in schools, as you mentioned, where I'm doing this at Harvard as well, and then I'm doing it through my podcasts too.
Right. And the odds of injury goes down dramatically when you're
true.
not on the field.
Well, so it's funny you say that. I once asked a VC friend of mine who used to be an operator, used to be a CEO, and I asked, what's the difference between venture investing and operating? Like, do you miss being CEO? And he's like, how at the Super Bowl, like when they win on the field, like the players just going completely nuts, and then they like flash to the owner's box, and there's some like rich old white guy with like cufflinks and a suit and tie, and he's like awkwardly high-fiving like his nephew who's like 30 years younger or whatever. Like, that's the venture capitalist, like where the highs are not as high, but the lows are not as low. And then the players like on the field, and like that's everything you need to know about the difference.
That's great. So you mentioned SPAC. I'm not sure if everybody on the call knows what a SPAC is. Maybe if you could just tell us in plain English what a SPAC is, and maybe the way you do it with your son on, Dad, I have a question podcast.
Sure. So yeah. So my podcast with my son now, we've had 50 something thousand listens. And we have an episode called "What is a SPAC," where I literally explain to my little kid what a SPAC is. So a SPAC is a shell company, essentially. So you take a sponsor, as it's known, which would be me, takes public a shell company. It trades on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or whatever. And we sell shares in that IPO. People that buy shares in that IPO, give us cash. That cash sits in trust. And then that shell company has no employees, really, 2 or 3 employees, basically. And it exists for one reason and one reason only, which is to go out and find a private company to merge with. And when that private company merges into this public shell company, the SPAC ceases to exist. The SPAC changes its name to the name of the private company, and poof, by virtue of that merger, that private company has gone public. The reason, you have to think about all the different parties of like why this is appealing. So this is appealing to the private company that goes public through the merger, because typically they can go public faster than if they go public in a regular way. Second of all, they get the sponsorship, so they get sort of the patina, the seal of approval from the sponsor who advises them and coaches them, as we've been discussing. And then perhaps one of the more significant benefits is they can issue projections. So in a regular IPO, companies are not allowed to issue financial projections because they don't have what's called safe harbor, meaning that if they don't hit those projections, they can get sued. So they tend not to issue projections. But in a merger, companies are allowed to issue projections with safe harbor, as long as they're prepared, adequately and intelligently. So this is why you see a lot of these crazy hockey stick high growth companies going public via SPAC merger. Like my second one, Supernova 2, is merging with Rigetti Computing, which is a quantum supercomputing company with basically no revenue today. They're trying to build a series of quantum computers that, if and when they work, those quantum computers will produce many hundreds of millions and hopefully billions of dollars of revenue. So we have projections for Rigetti that are a total hockey stick. They couldn't go public regular way, but they're a great SPAC candidate. So that's why the private companies like it. The reason the sponsors like it is we end up owning a small piece of the merged company. So I get paid by becoming a shareholder in these private companies after the merger. And then the public shareholders generally like it because they're buying the shares in the IPO. And if they don't like the deal that comes to market, they can always get their money back. And so for them, it's sort of a risk-free way to potentially buy into an IPO. But if they don't like the merger, then they vote against it and they get their money back. So that's what SPACs are. They have been around for a long time, actually, 15, 20 years, but they were kind of in the shadows. They entered the mainstream a couple years, 2-ish years ago. DraftKings was one that went public that way, Virgin Galactic, Open Door, and there have been a couple other very high profile ones, SoFi, it's becoming a little bit more standard lately.
Yeah, and just like IPOs, there are good and bad SPACs, right?
That's exactly right. There, there are good SPACs and there are bad SPACs. There are good SPAC sponsors that have done bad deals, bad mergers. There are bad SPAC sponsors that have done good mergers. It's just another way to go public is the long, just like there are, good deals that Goldman Sachs underwrites the IPO of, and there are bad deals that Goldman Sachs underwrites the IPOs of. And there are good deals that, no name investment bank underwrites the IPO of, et cetera. So it's just another method of going public.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So why don't we shift to real estate? Most of our listeners and clients own real estate. It's a very popular asset class, topic of discussions typically. So let's go back to 2005 when you were sitting in the conference room for 6 months coming up with the idea. You touched on this a little bit, but why don't we go a little deeper? What was your vision when you launched Zillow, and what developments surprised you along the way? Yeah,
so the vision, this might surprise you, but the vision was not that fully formed. It didn't get much more sophisticated than the following. There's a lot of money spent on real estate. Surely, if we can somehow find a way to get a lot of traffic, then we'll find a way to monetize one way or another. So let's build basically a real estate business that's a media company that sells advertising. We'll figure out exactly what that advertising is later, but let's just focus on aggregating traffic. How are we going to get traffic? Well, most real estate websites focus on answering the question, what's for sale? We think that's kind of a commoditized question to answer because there are, even when we were starting in 2005, there were already a lot of real estate sites that answered what's for sale. We asked a different question, which is, what's your house worth? And, I'll give you a very kind of Seattle perspective on this. Remember, I grew up here in New York and then here in LA, but then I found myself in Seattle for 15 years between Expedia and Zillow. In Seattle, our office building where we were brainstorming this idea looked out at Elliott Bay in the Puget Sound area. Elliott Bay is the water that's downtown Seattle sits right on top of, and it's beautiful. And a couple months a year, you can actually see whales breaching, orca whales on their way from Mexico up to Alaska in Elliott Bay. So it's kind of crazy. Think about that for a second. You're sitting at your office desk and you look out your window and there are whales there. And this is Seattle. It's not like Alaska or Antarctica. And so the point of this story is that we looked at whales breaching coming out of the water and then going back under. And when you go whale watching, which I'm sure you do all the time, what happens is when a whale breaches, everybody oohs and ahs. They take pictures like, oh, look at that whale, it's amazing. And then the whale goes underwater for like half an hour. And you're like, what's happening? How's it going? Like, where, there's nothing to do until the whales come out. Again, that was us with listings. When a home comes on the market for sale, everybody looks at it and take pictures about it, talks about it. Oh, did you see the house around the corner is for sale? Blah, 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 right? And then the house goes off the market, and like stuff is still happening. The whale is still underwater. There's lots of stuff happening when the home is off the market, but there was no transparency about it. And so one thing that's happening is that house is changing in value. The home value is changing during the 7 or 10 years that the house is off market. So we decided to try to shine a light, not just on the homes that are for sale, but on every home, and give people kind of superpowers where you could like have a God's eye view from above and see a price on every rooftop. And monetization would come later. So that was the original business plan. It's not particularly well formed in retrospect, but for the first 2 or 3 years, we had no listings of homes for sale. All we had was the Zestimate, bed bath square footage, county data, this kind of voyeuristic lens into every home in America, but nothing about what was for sale. And we became the 3rd or 4th most visited real estate site without listings. And then 2008 happened. And by the way, there's a trend here of like, usually about 2 years after I started a company, that
catastrophe occurs.
Catastrophe in my industry, almost brings down the world. 2001 travel, and now 2008 with financial crisis. So again, my industry is like afflicted by this global calamity, the global financial crisis. And the good news for us was interest in real estate went way up because everyone's home value was suddenly declining and they were freaking out. The other good news was we went to the real estate industry at that time and said, hey, you can't seem to sell your houses. How about you put them on our website for free? And so brokerages and MLSs and real estate agents who had previously viewed Zillow very suspiciously suddenly embraced us because we had traffic and it was free to put their listings on our site. It was very similar to 2001 after 9/11, where the hotel companies and airlines that were kind of ambivalent about distribution through online travel sites, they really embraced online travel sites after 9/11 because they needed the distribution. And so this is an important theme, which is that a lot of great startups get built during these down cycles, downturns. It's harder to raise capital, but if you already have the capital, you can actually build a much better business because all the cards get thrown up in the air in the industry. Everything that, companies that, if you're an enterprise SaaS business and you sell software, like, in times of change, companies that might have taken 2 years to decide whether or not to buy your software, maybe they'll do it in 2 weeks. Like everything is up for grabs during these periods of upheaval. And so that was the first, that was 2008. Went public in 2011. We did 16 or 17 acquisitions after we went public. We acquired multiple brands: Street Easy in New York, Hot Pads for Rentals, Trulia, which was our main rival, realestate.com. And so we became a multi-brand media site selling ads to real estate agents. We got up to about $1 billion of revenue from real estate agents. And that took us to about 5 years ago, when everything was great and we were doing well. And then we decided to pivot the whole company in favor of iBuying and kind of bet the company on this brand new business model, which is in the news today because, I retired 3 years ago and left the company in my co-founder's hands. And I left the board and have been doing other things, some of which compete with Zillow, even though I'm still a shareholder. And yesterday Zillow announced its retreat away from the iBuying business and a return to the roots of just selling ads rather than buying and selling houses. So it's a very you're catching me at a very strange moment in time.
So just a quick summary of what iBuying is for those who don't know.
Yeah, iBuying is when the company buys your house and then renovates it and resells it quickly. So to the seller, it's massively appealing. Instead of refurbishing your own house, putting a yard sign up, hiring a real estate agent, paying 6% and not knowing when the house is going to sell, and keeping your house show ready and taking the kids out of the house and the dogs out of the house every time there's a showing. Instead, Zillow or OfferPad or Open Door makes you an offer over the phone and then walks the house and just says, okay, your house is worth $300,000 and I'm going to charge you a 4% fee or an 8% fee or whatever. what closing date do you want? And that's it. You just turn over the keys. And actually, OfferPad literally moves you as well. They pay for your moving company. And so it's really appealing to the seller. These companies make money by charging that service fee and then refurbishing the house and then reselling it, hopefully for more than they paid for it. In Zillow's case, they overbought. They didn't detect that the market was slowing a little bit. And so they bought too much. They didn't renovate it quickly enough, and they were left with much too much inventory. And then they decided to fold.
Yeah, that's a tough business.
It is
Yeah.
difficult business. I mean,
Yeah.
OfferPad and Opendoor are doing it very successfully, and so it surprises me greatly that Zillow is packing it in after making such a enormous 2,000 employee bet and hundreds of millions of capital, and really bet the brand on it, and they are abandoning it, which is just very, very surprising. But and the stock is tanking, down 25% today on the news. So it's anyway, not a great day to be a Zillow shareholder. It's good news for OfferPad and Opendoor, both of whom now have a wide open lane to really create this category, because it is a much better way to sell your home. And that's the irony of the situation, is that Zillow helped create the category and help prove that sellers love this product. That it's like selling your car to CarMax. Instead of like fixing all the dents in your car and then listing it on eBay yourself and having people come to your house and buy it and figure out how to sell a car to an individual, like you just drive it into CarMax or even into a dealership and you just turn it over. And yeah, of course, you're leaving a couple percent on the table by doing it that way, but that's the service fee that company is making. Isn't that better for you? And so I'm totally confident that that's the way that many, many, many homes are going to sell in the future. I think that OfferPad and Opendoor are going to do really well here.
So does that mean that traditional brokers should be worried that their jobs will be displaced?
So on these types of deals, their commissions will be a lot lower. So right now, iBuying is 0.5% of all real estate transactions in the US. I think it will get to at least 10%. And that's nationwide. So that means that in the buy box, as they say, in certain, $300,000 home in suburban Atlanta, 50% of them are going to be sold to these institutional buyers. Why so high? Because in Brentwood, none of them are going to be sold to institutional buyers because the prices are too high for them to put that much capital at risk and deal with hold the house for 6 months during the refurbishment instead of 60 days or 6 days in the case of a lower end house in suburban Atlanta. So should agents be worried? Was your question, Alex? The answer is, I would be worried if I was a median realtor in the median market in a $200,000-300,000 price point. Yeah, I think they're in trouble. A high-end agent on the west side of LA is going to be just fine. So there'll be a bifurcation there.
Okay. Why don't we shift gears to second home co-ownership, which
Sure.
is what Picasso does. Maybe talk to us first about what that is,
Yeah,
why it's booming in popularity, and what's so special about it.
Yeah, so Picasso is an amazing company, an amazing concept. Frankly, it's much further along after its first year in business than anything I've ever been involved in. We'll see how this story ends, if it ends up being a $50-100 billion company or not. That very much remains to be seen, but it's off to a faster start than anything, than Zillow or Hotwire or anything I've been involved in. Picasso allows people to buy a portion of a second home. And so the insight here is that owning a second home is an amazing thing. My co-founder and I have been lucky enough to be able to do that. And we're trying to democratize that. Second home ownership changes lives, and it shouldn't just be accessible to the 1%. It should be accessible to the 10% or the 50% of the population. And that's achievable. That's possible. It's possible through co-ownership, because second homes are an incredibly underutilized asset. So Picasso lets you buy as little as 1/8 of a home in Malibu and Laguna and Aspen and Tahoe and Santa Barbara and wherever in Miami. We're launching in Spain this week. And you do the scheduling of visiting your home through the Picasso app. You don't know who the other co-owners are. It doesn't matter. It still feels like your house. and we do the property management, and it's totally turnkey. And so it allows you to own a second home with no fuss, no muss, and you're not throwing money away on an Airbnb rental. Instead, it's your home, and you're forming memories and connections to that individual property. And it's a really exciting idea that is taking off.
That's awesome. What other areas do you think are ripe for being taken over by technology? Either in real estate or even other industries. You have this digitalization of the economy that's been supercharged in many ways by COVID. Maybe talk to us about just your perspectives in that regard.
Yeah. So I mean, the two, I'd say the two of the trends that have kind of informed my career have been this democratization, taking something that's only accessible to a small portion of people and making it accessible to everybody, right? So real estate information was accessible to agents and appraisers. Now it's available to everyone. Second home ownership was available to rich folks. Now it's more widely available because of Picasso and growing every day. Travel discounts were available to a small portion of people that were in the know. That became readily available. So I have made a career of trying to democratize things that were inaccessible. The other big theme that I've focused on is almost the opposite, which is the verticalization of things. So like if you think of social media for a second, social media is horizontal, right? Meaning that you use Instagram or Facebook. It's like it covers all topics. But social media, I believe, is verticalizing now, where you've got LinkedIn for your career social network, All Trails for hiking, Recon Food for cooking for people that are interested in food and restaurants and cooking, Strava for running, Peloton for cycling. I mean, these are vertical social networks in each of these categories. Doctors have a bunch. There's one for oil field workers, which has raised tons of venture capital. I forget what that's called, but people that work on oil rigs, are having their own social network, believe it or not. So, and then .la is a media and news site that covers LA tech. And so it's like the benefit of this unbundling of verticalization is these niche services can build more bespoke products. .la can have an event just for people interested in LA tech. Recon Food can build a feature just about menus and recipes that Instagram is never going to build a recipe feature because it's a horizontal social network. And Strava can build a feature around showing your running route. Instagram's never going to do that because it's horizontal. So the verticalization is another big theme of my investing. But the two big themes that are in vogue right now that I have exposure to, but I haven't started companies in, are Web3 and NFTs. And so, Web3 is this concept that the creators, those that contribute to the community of a site or a service that they contribute to, they should get the value. So think like Web 1 was, you go to a website and you buy something. You go to Amazon, you buy something. Okay. Web 2.0 was user-generated content. So I go to Yelp or TripAdvisor and I'm benefiting from other stuff or Wikipedia, other stuff that other people have written. That was Web 2.0. Web 3 says, how come I'm always the one writing stuff on TripAdvisor, but TripAdvisor makes all the money? Like if I'm going to contribute to TripAdvisor, I want to make the money. And so what these Web3 companies are doing is they're giving tokens to those that contribute to the network, and those tokens are redeemable for something, and they also trade. And so that's why you frequently hear about tokenization and Web3 kind of in the same breath, and cryptocurrency, because usually these tokens are also a cryptocurrency. So this is a huge trend, and if anyone listening is hearing about this for the first time, you're going to hear about it a lot more, and you probably have been hearing about it, but you probably haven't focused on it. So Web3 and tokenization is like all the rage in tech, and then NFTs are kind of a derivative of that. NFTs are also all the rage, because an NFT is just a concept of like owning a single digital asset that can be backed by something physical or not be backed by something physical. And the reason that NFTs are so in the rage is because of this other big trend, which is the metaverse, which is more in the news lately because Facebook just renamed the company Meta. And the whole point of the metaverse is that we're going to live in some virtual world like this one. I mean, people are like, oh, that's crazy, Spencer. But like, what do you think this is, right? There are people like you and I don't think we've ever met in person, but we're experiencing each other virtually. And, you've got something behind you. It's like a diploma or something that adorns your wall. there's no reason why there shouldn't be a digital thing behind you. Maybe it's a NFT of a concert ticket, you know, your first or it's an NFT of an autograph of a soccer player that you like, and you want me to see that in your background, and so you might go buy the digital version of that, and it becomes part of your digital life, whether it's in Zoom or it's in Roblox or Fortnite or Meta or whatever Facebook becomes, or Oculus, or who knows where. And so anyway, that's how NFTs tie into all this stuff. It's just like digital bling for your virtual life. There, that's actually that's a good catchphrase. NFTs are digital bling for your virtual life. But anyway, so those are like the big trends in tech right now. And the good news for those of you in LA, I know a lot of our listeners here are in LA. Almost all this stuff is mostly happening here. Like LA, this is the most exciting time to be in tech in LA, because LA tech is the intersection of media, entertainment, pop culture, fashion, tastemaking, you know, e-commerce, like social, like all of it is happening here because this is the entertainment capital and the cultural capital of the world. And so most of the cool startups doing cool stuff in the space are based here, which is amazing. I mean, it's like the reason Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley is because that's where they were manufactured silicon chips in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That's actually, you know, now most of that manufacturer is in Taiwan. And so there's really no reason why the Bay Area should be anything, but the studios are here. The entertainment industry, the music industry is here. The athletes are here. Like all of that's in LA. And I don't see that moving. So there's a good shot that LA tech can be the thing for the next 50 years, the way the Bay Area was for the prior 30 years. I'm betting on that.
It's fascinating. Just the pace of change is remarkable. And for many people, it's hard to keep up, especially, you know, those that are not in their 20s. So we appreciate you explaining it in easy to understand terms. It's really fascinating.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Alex. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care. All right, bye-bye.